Hi everyone, hi Gmat Club viewers. My name is Shimri and I'll introduce myself. And today we're in a very interesting session. I think this is actually one of the first sessions we've ever had on this topic. And we're going to try and discuss the differences between the top US programs and the top European/UK programs in this session. So with me in this session is Shriram. Hello, Shriram.
Hey guys, hi Shimri.
Hi. So maybe start by introducing yourself and then we'll take it from there.
I'm Shriram. I did my MBA at MIT SLOAN School of Management in Boston. And I'll tell more about that later, the experience of the MBA. I have been running my own startup that I founded at MIT called Indian Raga since. And storytelling is a passion of mine. So I do storytelling in performing arts, music and dance throughout the day. And then I work as an admissions consultant with ARINGO the rest of the time. And yeah, excited to be here and to answer all of your questions and talk about the differences.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shriram. Okay, so my name is Shimri Winters. I head the strategy team at ARINGO MBA Admission Consulting. A bit about me, I have a computer science undergraduate degree. And after my university, I worked as a programmer and a team leader in a big IT company. Post my London Business School MBA, I went to work as a consultant and then as a business development manager for big IT companies. And I've been at ARINGO for 7 years full time. And that's me. And again, I'll also tell you about my London Business School experience a bit later. So let's just review kind of the slides we want to discuss and the agenda. So this is our only marketing slide, which is going to be very short. ARINGO helps people get into top MBA programs. We're very, very good. Check us out on aringo.com. That's it. That was my marketing slide. I hope I'm very good at marketing. This is the agenda. Okay, so I'm going to go through very, very shortly why do a top 10 MBA program. And the reason I want to just go through some kind of statistics and reasonings are because I want all of us to be on the same page. There might be different people at different levels of knowledge on this call. And once we finish with that, we can jump into some facts about the differences between US and European or UK programs. And obviously, Shriram and I will tell our personal stories. And we've chosen about 10 talking points where each of us will kind of say their view on the talking points that we'll share later. This is an open session. I know it's on YouTube. We can see your comments. So please ask questions, comment, say we're rubbish, say we're great, whatever you want. And we'll try and answer everything at the end of the session. Okay, but please keep asking and making comments. Shriram, are you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's the agenda. Let's start. I'm just going to go through the 3-4 slides about the general MBA very quickly, so just that we're all on the same page. So again, first slide is why do an MBA or why do a top 10 MBA? And if you're on this session, I hope you know and you already have your reasons why you want to do a top MBA. It's hard to talk about an MBA and not talk about the job after the MBA. I would say most of the people I speak to just say very honestly, I want an MBA because I want to switch my career or I want to find a better job post MBA. I want to make a lot of money. I want to work in an industry that I really want to get into and in big companies and make a difference. And an MBA really does do that. It's a very good path, not the only path, but it's a very good path to finding a very good job. Another reason is career switching. Like I said, a lot of people are good at what they do, but they want to move to more business-related roles or just to do something completely different. And an MBA is very good for career switching. Most of the MBAs are either in the US or in the UK or in EU, the top MBAs. And it definitely might be in a different country than where you live at right now. So it opens an opportunity to go and live abroad, study abroad and then work abroad. And I hope we won't cry while Shriram and I tell our personal stories, but it's an amazing experience. It's interesting, it's fun, you meet new people, you learn new things, so it's just an amazing experience. So this is kind of a graphic expression of what I said. Most of the people I talk to want to do MBAs because it's a career switching opportunity. Some of them are very happy where they are and they just want to get an extra edge on their peers. and those are the accelerators. So you're in a company and you just want to move up the ladder, and an MBA might differentiate you from your peers. And we're seeing more and more a third group of future entrepreneurs. They know they want to be entrepreneurs. They know they want to found a company or manage a startup or a bigger company. They're not exactly sure what that company is or how to do it. And they know that the MBA will give them a wide set of tools and network, a brand, and knowledge to know how to do it in the future. I put here academia in red. Again, an MBA is not a direct path to a PhD or to then some kind of academia professor job. So I think there's other ways to do your PhDs. I'm not saying it's impossible, but just think about that twice. If an MBA is the quickest and best route for you to then just continue to your PhD. Basically, 2 more slides for general knowledge on MBAs. And this slide is kind of what's the admission process, and we'll discuss this. But basically, this slide is exactly the same for European and UK programs and US programs. Again, there's no difference here. And when you want to apply to an MBA, basically, there's usually 3 prerequisites. One is you have to have an undergraduate degree. I have to admit, I know already about 4 programs that don't require an undergraduate degree. All 4 are in Europe, by the way. And if you're a very interesting candidate and don't have an undergraduate degree, we work with 2 or 3 of you a year, so it's possible. But in the US, that's a requirement. The second one is if English is not your mother tongue or you didn't study in university in English, you might need some kind of English exam. And the third one is the Gmat. Although this year there might be some Gmat waivers in very few universities, generally when we speak, that is a big requirement, or a GRE or a Gmat for the universities. So if you have those prerequisites, now you can work on the application itself, which involves usually 3 big sections, which is your resume, a few essays, and 2 recommendations. Once you have all that, you're ready to apply. Again, all this is common knowledge and common both for the US and the UK. And my last slide, which is again common, is just the timing. The timing is actually very similar. Most programs, again, I'm trying to kind of make it black or white. So most programs, both in the US and in Europe, will start in September. And the application will be 1 year before the program starts. So round 1, the first application date, will be a year before the actual studies start. There's more application deadlines, as you can see, round 2 in January, round 3 in April. The European programs tend to have a few more rounds. So for example, when I speak now, November, to people that want to apply for this coming September, and they don't have a Gmat or something like that, I tell them they actually still have time in Europe because you can still apply in February or even March to most of the programs, and you still have a good chance. In the US, we usually try and rush people to apply in the first 2 rounds where the chances are a bit higher. Yes, there's some programs with a January stream. I think that's less important. And that was it. So those were our general slides. I hope now you know why do an MBA and what it takes to apply for an MBA. And now let's dig into the differences between the US and Europe. Shriram, I wrote you a couple of slides about the US, so take it away.
Great. So I'm also seeing a few questions I just want to quickly touch upon. So the question about will IELTS work instead of TOEFL and the equivalent, that depends from school to school. So you might want to check on the school website for some of those questions. And in the previous slide, is it too late to start GMAT prep for 2021? Not really. It depends upon how much time and how good of a test taker you are. So just 2 quick notes on that. All right, coming to the US schools. So the US is the place where the MBA was born. And most of the brands are the legacy brands in the world of the MBA degree. And so you can see all of the top schools here, and the rankings might change every year based on which one you're referring to. US News, Financial Times, many other ones. I would go with both ranking and the culture, and the fit matters a lot. So if you look at each of the schools on here, you cannot go wrong with any of them. But the kind of experience you have when you go and enjoy in a learning environment that you thrive in amongst a set of people that you really vibe with becomes the most important factor, in my opinion, to pick which of these programs you might want to go for. Some of these schools have been rising really quickly. Chicago Booth, for example, about 10 years ago was not really much, in the top rankings, but now is one of the top schools. And similarly, there are some other schools that are growing very quickly. And so that's the reason I say don't be stuck up too much on just the top brands that you know of in your country. And I'll come to my story later, but when I was applying, I basically did not know of too many schools because I was in Mumbai. And we only spoke about a few brands. And only after coming to the States, I realized that, you should not go only based on whether the school does an admissions event in your country or not, and just think about a broader set of schools that might be the right fit for you. So that's on the top universities and programs in the United States. As you can see, we've just picked one as an example to give you just a standard composition of what a US school looks like. And this is by no means a generalization. But for example, if you look at Columbia, 800 MBA students a year. A lot of the US programs on average are bigger than the European schools. Now, the advantage of that in some ways is the fact that you have a much broader and bigger network of alumni. So if you want, for example, like I was in the media entertainment section, and which relatively tends to be a smaller group of people. But if your school has a bigger network, then the likelihood that you have more people from that space is higher. Of course, if it's a smaller environment or a smaller class size, you get to know more of your classmates and it's more of an intimate experience. And the US programs do a pretty good job of balancing it out. Within the 800 MBA students, you would be broken into sections and classes that you would most likely work with. And that makes a big difference in the kind of experience you have. You have people from 66 countries. The US does tend to be, the international citizens is 44% or roughly around that percentage compared to Europe, which tends to be a lot more diverse. Average Gmat in general tends to be a little bit higher for the US programs. They do value that a lot more. Average age is 28 for Columbia, but in general, compared to the European schools, it tends to be lower. So if you're looking for an MBA much earlier in your career than the US programs, but I would like to caveat that by saying that we do work with a lot of candidates who are on the older side of the spectrum. And that is fine because the US programs, many of them are big enough that they do have room for candidates that might not be aligned with their average, for example, right? Prior work experience, again, 5 years roughly. Some schools might be 3 to 4, some schools might be 5 to 6, but definitely lesser as compared to the European programs. And diversity of male female is roughly around 40%. So that's just a rough example of one school. And obviously there's differences across different programs. The MBA program tuition, this is something that's much talked about. US tuition is higher, but also salaries in general would be higher, maybe with the exception for some of the top European programs. So cost of living in the United States is on the higher side for sure. And hence salaries, tuition, all of that.
Correct.
I will, Shimri, you want to add something?
No.
You can go back to the previous one. Yeah, so the previous slide, Shimri. Yeah, so the tuition is around the 130K, 140K. Most programs are 2 years. You do have some programs that are 1 year now to cater to the rising demand for shorter programs. You do have a host of scholarships, and I can talk more about that in the question segment. I for one, was a Siebel Scholar, and there were a lot of scholarships available on campus. You have financial need-based scholarships, merit-based. In some programs, you can also do, you can be a TA for some of the programs, and that gets applied towards your tuition. The Fulbright, the Forte Foundation, and there's quite a few fellowships that are also available to offset some of these costs. Next slide. We've just posted here some of the salaries 1 year post-MBA and 3 years post-MBA. And this definitely tends to be one of the biggest reasons for picking an MBA because it does accelerate both your career and your salary prospects substantially in the United States. A lot of this is also colored, of course, by the tech industry, which is one of the biggest recruiters, and tech salaries, especially in Silicon Valley and in the bigger cities, are very, very high. And so that's a big advantage of the US MBA in general, the access to Silicon Valley, the presence of that, the booming tech industry in the United States, and having access to that. And for many, many international candidates, it is often a one-way ticket to the US. And I can talk a little bit more about that too.
Correct. Okay, remember guys, this is just a very general overview, and soon Shriram and I will actually talk about all the points that you're also raising on the chat, and also that we've thought about at home. So thanks, Shriram. Actually, you really helped me a lot, because a lot of the points while you were talking, I was thinking, boom, huge advantage to Europe. So I'll go into those.
Them at the end, so let's do this.
As a proud London Business School graduate, don't worry, I'll nail it for you. So anyway, if I look at the top European programs, these are some of them. I have to admit that there's less top European programs than in the US. What I like about the European programs, and I think this is very different, is you might not have heard of all of them because they're very, very small programs. And again, London Business School or INSEAD, their main degree is an MBA. Yes, in the last few years, they've added Master in Management or Master in Finance, but still their core degree is an MBA. If we were looking at a typical school before Columbia, so Shriram mentioned they have 800 MBA students. What we didn't mention is Columbia, I didn't Wikipedia it, but I'm assuming they have 20 to 30,000 students a year in the school, right? Because there's undergraduate degrees and there's master degrees and PhDs, etc. But the London Business School, you won't have all that because there aren't any undergraduate degrees or other degrees. So if there's 500 MBAs a year, there might be another 100 other degrees a year. So that's 600 students a year, something like that, maybe double that if the degree is 2 years, but that's it. So it's a very small school, and this is an example for most of the European schools, which only do an MBA. Shriram mentioned it. The other stats are very similar. Maybe the Gmat's a bit lower and the average age is a bit higher, but kind of in the same areas. Another huge differentiator is the internationalism and percentage of international citizens. So at INSEAD, there won't be many French students. At London Business School, there won't be many British students. At the US Barcelona, there won't be many Spanish students. These schools are very, very international. And yes. Last slide kind of thing about the cost and obviously then the salaries. So the tuition is less. The main reason of the tuition being less is the shorter programs. In Europe, all the programs are between 10 months and 1.5 years. So there aren't any 2-year programs. Most of the programs are 1 year. Again, there's 3 exceptions that are a bit longer. So the tuition is less. Also, the return on investment is quicker. There's also the set of scholarships, and again, Shriram and I will review this later. But there are various scholarships, so you have to check them out per school. If I look at I just added one more slide here, Shriram, sorry, about the recruiters that came to London Business School. This is a 2 years old slide. And you can see that a lot of the companies are very similar companies that the ones you imagine recruit from MIT or UCLA. Okay, they're big international companies. Most of them are probably American. And they're coming to recruit either for the European headquarters or for other headquarters. So very similar set of companies, very similar industry split. So Shriram was talking about the tech booming industry. Tech is a huge post-MBA career in Europe as well as finance, as well as consulting, as well as industry, which is basically all the rest. If I look at salaries, salaries right now are a bit lower in Europe. This is the post 3 years salary. I have to say a lot is to do with the exchange rate, and who knows what will happen in a few years. A couple of years ago, salaries were higher in London than in New York, but then the pound went down. So a lot of it is to do with exchange rates, because basically you might be working in the same companies and at the same level, but you might get a different salary package due to location. And that's it. So Shriram, nice picture.
Thank you. That was actually incidentally in London.
Okay, of course, best place.
I know, yeah. All right, so I just want to share. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I thought we would each of us tell like our stories very shortly, but around the MBA, and then we can dig into talking points and try and compare a European experience to a US experience.
Sounds good. So I grew up in Mumbai, and I did my undergrad at IIT Bombay. So I was an engineer at that point. And then I worked in management consulting for 2 years with a boutique consulting firm, after which I went into the performing arts industry because that is my life's biggest passion. And For 2 years, I ran the marketing and business development team at India's largest performing arts center. And after that, I applied for an MBA, and I only applied to 3 schools. And after I had the MIT SLOAN interview, I was just so sold. Actually, not just after the interview, I have to admit, I came for admit weekend all the way to the US just for 2 days. And in the first 20 minutes, I decided this is absolutely the place I want to be for the next 2 years. And so that's my MIT story. I just loved the whole process. I loved everything about the schools, the way they went about the entire thing, the kind of students I was talking to, the alumni, the networks that they had, and I was sold. And I came in to do my MBA. During the MBA, I pretty much leveraged every single resource on campus that you could. And I do want to talk here about the advantage of programs like MIT, Columbia, Stanford, Harvard, of being situated amongst a broader university ecosystem, which for me was fantastic because I took courses across other departments in engineering departments on campus. For example, there was a course on the art, science, and business of video games that was offered at MIT in the comparative media research program. There was a program, I'm forgetting the name of the program, but they had all these amazing courses across campus that you had access to. During the MBA, I think pretty much every day, especially in most US programs, you have some or the other guest speaker. If not in the MBA school, then in the engineering department, there's some inspiring person coming and speaking, right from Sal Khan to the CEO of Dropbox to like all these guys coming and offering advice and just chatting with students, which I really leveraged a lot when I was there. I was the co-president of the Media Entertainment and Sports Club on campus. And in the US, the networking component is a really big and integral part of the program. Pretty much for every job, you do have to do all the networking and go and meet industry executives, do company visits. So I led the company visits for New York and part of the Los Angeles trek as well, to meet with all the gaming companies, the Broadway musical theaters, the media tech companies at the time, movie studios, and so on. And you really get to pick between, networking with all these executives and figuring out if that's the industry you want to be in. It's a big chunk of the program. And I did, I think, 3 or 4 internships. I did an internship with the president of Lincoln Center. I did a second internship with the head of global digital business at Sony Music. And so I was also consulting with Disney Theatrical Group. So I made the most of really the networking offering that the program had. By the end of my first year, I also became a Siebel Scholar, so I got a big chunk of money to offset towards my tuition. I also became a Tata Fellow on campus, and that pretty much took care of my entire MBA tuition expense. And so I know a lot of students, and I'm seeing some questions about that too, are a little concerned about the investment. When you go in, the loan, the financial aid for many of the schools, they give you the financial aid at very low interest rates. And I personally don't think it's a big deal. The kind of salaries you're going to make and the kind of career you're going to have, it can pretty much offset that. And then if you do the right things on campus, then you can take advantage of some of the scholarship programs like I did. And so that's something to keep in mind as you think about these big costs of the US MBA. During the MBA, I took a class at the Media Lab, just because MIT allows you to cross-register for courses. And I developed the business plan for my company as the final deliverable in that class. And then my professor just took me out for a beer and he was like, why is this not a company yet? And really inspired me to get started. There were a ton of resources on campus to learn about the basics of entrepreneurship. Long story short, started my company, stayed back, figured out the entire immigration cycle. Happy to chat offline about that too. And 7 years in, I'm still running my company and it's been great. So that's really my story through the MBA. Yeah, Shimri?
Thanks, Shriram. So again, I'll just introduce a bit more about myself, and then Shriram and I will just start answering common talking points, and we'll try and take them to Europe, UK versus the US. My personal story is a bit different than Shriram's. So I was a computer programmer. I was stuck in a very big company, good terms, but just doing R&D basically and programming. And I just didn't see a way out of this R&D gold cage, because I was making a nice salary, etc. But I just wanted to go to more business roles. And that was my reason to do an MBA. I have a very low Gmat. I think I have a 660, if I remember correctly. Luckily for me, that was enough for me to get into London Business School. My experience was amazing. London Business School is a very American school, and it's the degree was 21 months. Today, it's a bit more flexible, and it's between 15 and 21 months. But my degree was 21 months, and the first year is core courses. The second year are electives. I did an internship at Yahoo, and it was amazing. I was offered a position at the end of my internship to be the PMO of Yahoo Europe, but I wanted consulting. So post MBA, I went to consulting. In the second year, because I knew I had this job, I just wanted to do interesting courses, and I wasn't too interested in the finance electives or even in the marketing electives. And the electives that most interest me were entrepreneurship. I think there's like 10 or 11 entrepreneurship elective courses to choose out of. There's something like 100 elective courses. So there's so much variety. And I was just having a great time and just learning more. You know, I'm not an entrepreneur, but you know, that seemed very interesting at the time. In terms of the MBA, I mean, it was amazing. I still have an amazing network of friends. We just had a little reunion. Obviously, it was moved to Zoom, and it was amazing to see I'm in touch with a lot of my classmates, but the ones I wasn't in touch with, amazing to see where they are today. CFOs of medium-sized companies, CEOs of medium-sized companies, senior executives in very big companies, lots of entrepreneurs. I was just surprised. I didn't do a percentage, but must be 30 or 40% started a business within 2 or 3 years post MBA. Just unbelievable. So much tech in London right now. It's also, I keep thinking about London as a finance center like it was 10 years ago. No, it's such a huge tech center these days. So unbelievable the things that are happening there. And a lot of the schools, you know, have it be London Business School or NCAD or HEC, Paris, or the schools in Spain, etc., are very near or in a huge city, which is a hub for, you know, like London. I don't know if London's the hub for the world or for Europe, but in a huge city, and the connection between the school and the actual businesses in the city and the alumni in the city are amazing. So I think during the MBA, I went to lectures with Al Gore, Bill Gates, Anita Rudick, which is the founder of Body Shop, and so on. Jack Welch, the founder of the CEO of GE. Actually, the most interesting presentation I ever went to was, I think he's a sir, Sebastian Coe. He led the 2012 Olympics bid of London. Such an interesting presentation. For example, who should be the front of the presentation? Okay, should it be the Queen? Should it be Mr. Bean? Should it be J.K. Rowling? Or should it be David Beckham? By the way, who did they choose, Shriram? Do you know?
I have no idea. I was in Mr. Bean.
So the most famous person in 2012 was David Beckham. So they, you know, it was so interesting to see such a, you know, silly question, and who do you choose to be the front of the bid? But he actually went into explanation. Amazing. So I had an amazing time. Like I said, I post MBA, I went into consulting. Then I had several offers for different business development roles, and I worked. I went back to tech, but to more business related roles. My last role before I joined ARINGO 7 years ago was head of a business unit in a very big tech company. And that's me. That's it. Enough. Let's go into some discussion points, and then I'll show you that European schools are much better.
Well, you can try.
Okay, I'll try. The first discussion point, well, location. That's a silly discussion point.
Yeah, no, but location is everything, right? I think if you do want to be in the States, like I mentioned before, the MBA to the US programs is a one-way ticket. And a lot of people actually use the MBA as a way to start building a life in the United States. But apart from that, there's really nothing much to say about
Yes. Well, I actually agree with what you're saying. And I think location is, again, one of the most important factors, because a lot of people tell me, listen, you know, I can get into NCAD. It was ranked #1 in the 4 out of the last 5 years in the Financial Times. And then I want to find a US job. Now, I looked at some statistics. I think 20% of NCAD alumni are right now in the US. But how many of those are and were American or worked for American companies before the MBA, or maybe had US relationships before?
Yeah.
What I'm sure without checking is, even if I look at a not good US program, that 80 or 90% of the alumni are working in the US.
In the US.
So what I would say is, if you know you want to live in the US, go and study in the US. And don't look for European school for a pivot to move to the US, and vice versa. If you think you want to live in Europe or in Asia, yes, the US schools have good brands, but why not go and work? Why not study already in Europe or in Asia, and then you can build your network, and then you can continue living there. That's my take. Okay, let's move on. Another touchy subject: visas.
So I think a lot is changing this year, and by the way, today is going to be a dramatic day in everyone's life that's going to determine a lot of factors. About some of the people are asking about this. I'll come to that post-COVID.
Correct.
A lot of the top US programs are now converting their offering into a STEM program, or a STEM MBA, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Math, for those of you who are not familiar with the term. So as a STEM program, you get 3 years of the optional practical training, or OPT, after you finish your MBA, without the need for an H-1B visa. So it has become a little difficult, or more difficult, to get the H-1B. But now, instead of 1 year, you have 3 years for the programs that are demarcated as STEM. And if hopefully the Democrats come to power, that situation will become even better. So let's all
Shriram. Oh, interesting. I wonder who you voted for. So my take on this is different. If you would look 10 years ago, I would say, who cares about visas? Okay, your employer post-MBA will, get you the visa if it's in the US, H-1B, if it's in Europe, whatever. It's just money for them, okay, for these big companies to take out the visa. But what Shriram's saying is, in the last few years, it's getting more and more difficult in the US to get out visas. I still think most top MBAs, their employer doesn't have an issue in getting them a visa.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's why they started this STEM program. But if this was points, I would say knockout to Europe and UK. You can stay 2 years, you can work without finding an employer. Then there's no problem. Your employer takes out a visa for you. So no problem at all. Everything's easier in visas than the US. But still, a lot of candidates that talk to us talk about the visa issue, and they're not looking at the big picture. The big picture is, you will find work at the end of the MBA, and your employer knows which buttons to push and which forms to send, and you will have a visa post-MBA. I think that goes in Europe, in the US, in the UK, everywhere.
Yeah, so there's one point I want to add, and then maybe 1 or 2 questions that are pertaining to this topic. So the one point I want to add, though, is if I were to cut a long story short, do not worry about visas for the top US programs or European programs, obviously, because I know n number of stories where, when you go to one of the top companies, if at all you're in that rare situation where the visa did not happen, the company takes care of you. They will post you to Toronto or to London, and reapply for the H-1B and bring you back to the States. So do not even worry about the entire situation. Soham's asking, will the current pandemic situation affect the post-MBA job scenario in the US or UK? And you want to have a go at the UK one first, and I'll talk about US.
Well, you're talking about a excellent question that no one knows. I think it will affect the job market, and it will be fantastic. So I think companies will have to be more efficient. Will have to worry and who they recruit. They'll have to recruit the best candidates. Again, we're talking about your post-MBA, which might be in 2-3 years. And therefore, let's hope there won't be a pandemic in 2-3 years. And I think you're in a fantastic situation right now. I just want to be honest. It's not me that's thinking this alone. It's the schools and it's the candidates as well. And if someone's been looking at the numbers, there's actually been an uplift right now in the number of candidates, because they want to complete their MBA, post-pandemic, and be there when the recruiters are looking for the best talent.
Yeah, and I would also just quickly add to that there are certain industries that are actually doing much better during the pandemic. Like I'm sure Zoom's recruiting a lot more than they did before.
Correct.
The tech industry has actually been doing much better. You look at the stock market, for instance. So I personally don't think there is that much of a problem for top MBA program graduates. But to Shimri's point, you don't even have to worry about it. You're thinking 2 or 3 years from now, so you're fine.
Correct.
And just one more before we move on. Shayan is asking, does graduating from HEC or IE restrict the job prospects to respective locations? I'm targeting HEC with a job in UK. Is this route tougher compared to targeting only UK schools?
That's a great question. So first of all, it's hard to, I don't know anything about you, and, I don't know what profile you have and what post-MBA industry you're looking for. We did a similar session to this a couple of weeks ago, which we compared NCAD stats to London Business School stats. And we saw that the biggest geography that NCAD graduates work in is London. Okay, so this makes sense. I mean, a lot of the headquarters of big international companies and European companies are based out of London and the UK. Another factor is you speak English. Okay, these programs are in English. You're not required to know French or required to speak native Spanish. And a lot of the headquarters will be in London. Having that said, it's a bit like we said before regarding the US and Europe. If you know your future, if you want your future to be in the UK, I think it's better for you to go and study in the UK, even if it's a school that's ranked a bit lower than HEC Paris. Yep. But still, I see Europe and the UK as one big geography. And historically, and I'm sure also in the future, I was going to say most, but a lot of the European graduates will go and work in the UK. Okay, let's move on. There's some other factors here, and this is when it gets a bit interesting because there are differentiators between the US programs and Europe. So Shriram, I think the size of the university is interesting because we both discussed it before, and we both saw an advantage in very different things. You saw an advantage in being part of this big university, because at MIT you joined the Media Lab, and I saw an advantage in being in a very small university because the professors knew my name. Sorry, I was trying to, yes. Anything else we want to talk about the size?
I agree that I think it's each to his own, right? Like if you want to be in an intimate program, and there are schools that value that. And by the way, MIT and Stanford do mention that it's just a 350 strong class, and there is a better likelihood, like I know the names of most of my batchmates, but that might not happen in a bigger program. I just am such a big advocate for lateral learning experiences that I think you will know 350 names no matter what school you're in, is my takeaway from that. Do you need to know 800 names? You probably don't, and that's just me. But the ability to go and just add on to your thinking in the MBA program with other interesting, cutting-edge, disruptive classes and innovative programs, I think to me personally mattered a lot, and I took advantage of that dramatically. So that's me. And this is
Okay. We'll agree not to agree. Return on investment, I think, knockout to the European schools. I hope you agree. Shorter programs, you start working, you pay less money, you start working quicker, better return on investment.
That's short-term thinking. I think the ability to go to a fantastic program like MIT and just like have a brand for life, I think is phenomenal. I will never, ever agree with the ROI statement on that. But again, that's me. But on a more serious note, there is a short-term versus a long-term conversation that many people have, and everyone has different circumstances, and I respect that. So yes, if the short-term ROI does make a difference to you and financially you want to be in a more stable situation and not take on too much debt in an unstable scenario, absolutely. European schools definitely offer better ROI. In the longer term, if brand matters, for instance, if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm trying to raise money and I want to go out and just look at like the top VCs and angels who know my university name before I even walk into the door, I think the brand and the pedigree do make a big difference. And I've seen that personally in my own case too. So again, very vehement advocate for US programs.
So definitely a quicker return on investment in Europe. the long term really does depend on, on your own career and, where you take it to. I agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree regarding the European schools not having a brand. I think they have a brand. There's a lot of venture capital money in Europe as well, not just in the Silicon Valley. Yeah, but let's continue. So internships, this is an interesting issue. So a lot of the European one-year programs do not have an internship. Okay, and the reason is you study a whole year, then you start working in a job. Even if I look at NCAD, so the September stream does not have an internship. And if I look at the one-year programs, Oxford, Cambridge, IE Madrid, ISADE Barcelona, etc., do not have an internship. This is, I think, an advantage and a disadvantage. So if you know where your career is going, and again, if you just want a very quick MBA and a quick-ish and return on investment, and you want to start your life, maybe an internship is not necessary for you. On the other hand, I'm actually a big fan of internships, and some of the European programs do have them. And for example, I did do an internship in a very big tech company, like I said, Yahoo, but then decided after the internship and after getting a job offer that I actually want to go into consulting. So I think that's another advantage of the internship. It's right, they check you out, and it's a trial for you, but you're also checking them out, and it's a great opportunity to see, do you want to work in the pharma industry? Do you want to work as an investment banker? Do you want to work at McKinsey as a consultant? So my intake is whatever's good for you, but in Europe you do have both options.
Yeah. So the US, most programs will come with the internship, and I think again, if doing an internship is valuable to you, absolutely an advantage. But if you want to go through it very quickly, then it's not. So yeah, I agree with you.
Correct. Bran, so you were touching this before, mentioning how the VCs won't know London Business School.
No, I did not. That's dramatic. No, they'll know some of the schools. They'll know.
Okay.
Most of them.
So I think this is also something that I touched before. I know a lot of candidates will know London Business School or NCAD and possibly Oxford and Cambridge, and they might not know some of the other brands. I think what's important is the recruiters, the employers, the future investors, they know the brands. And I agree, they might not know, a school that's ranked 40 in Europe, but they'll know the top 10 European schools. And the reason they know them is they know people from these schools. Same with the US. I will say that in Europe, I think there's 10 good schools, and in the US, there might be 30 good schools. I do agree that there's a lot more schools with bigger brands.
Agree on all of that.
Okay, international environment, another huge plus for the European schools. So I think the stats, are easy here. In most US schools, 60% are US citizens. In most European schools, 90% are foreigners. And at least, my environment at London Business School. So if I look at my study group, and again, at London Business School, each stream has smaller classes with about 70 people per class, and you're split up into study groups. My study group had Paulina from Poland, and Katya from Bulgaria, myself, Mohammed from Bahrain, and Rowan from the UK. So you can see the internationalism just in my 5-people study group. But in the class, we had people from the US, we had people from India, and from all over the world, basically. Amazing international environment, a lot of color, and every group of citizens, let's call it, that come from the same background, used to do kind of a weekly theme of their country, and we used to eat the food and dance to the songs of different countries on a weekly basis. And this is a huge multicultural international event every year at London Business School, and in each of these schools, and such an amazing international environment. And today I really have friends from all over the world, which is an amazing experience.
Agree with that. I think the US definitely ranks lower than the European schools on that, but I would say that, especially coming from where I came from before the program, 44% international was already a huge leap. So whether that is 44 or 66 or 98, I think all US and UK programs, the top ones, do emphasize a lot of diversity, and I think it's lovely to have that. Europe definitely has more of it. Sure.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So culture, it's funny because I believe that a lot of the culture is to do with two things. One is that we wrote here the class size, and the other is just the location. And I went to study in a university which is in a big city. So I'm assuming a lot of the culture was to do with the city. And because they have the opportunity to just host alumni that were on the way to their office in the morning, but they can come in the morning to speak to us. But I'm assuming that a lot of the culture in little cities would be different just because probably the group would be more close to each other. And another thing is the class size that we discussed. What do you think about that, Shriram? Because you spoke a bit about differences in university cultures.
Yeah, so I think the differences in case of the US schools are pretty stark and not always influenced by the city. For example, both Harvard and MIT are in the same city, but the cultures of collaboration are dramatically different. So I think a lot of it is just the DNA of the school itself. And this is where the whole legacy brand thing plays a big role, where these have been determined like many, many years ago, and they just continue on and just tend to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think collaboration overall is a hallmark of the MBA program in general. Most schools, I'm sure many of them know, most schools do not emphasize the GPA as much. Some schools do, but in most cases, recruiters don't care what your GPA or the academic performance is.
Correct.
So people are incentivized to share and really collaborate on the academic component of it. The case study system of discussing in class makes it a lot more collaborative. You're doing assignments in teams, and you're really forced to really collaborate and interact with people from diverse perspectives. So I think that's just a standard hallmark. But yes, within that, there are schools that pride themselves on different degrees of collaboration. And I think it's important what kind of a learning environment you thrive on to look at that. So what I'm hearing you say, Shimri, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in Europe, it just tends to be broadly, you can just say they are collaborative and or maybe influenced by the city. But in the US, it's not necessarily a function of that. So you may want to do your research and talk to people from that school to see if that culture and vibe is best for you.
I agree. General remark, Shriram and I have something like 3 more discussion points, and then we'll answer all the questions. So I can see there are some questions on the chat. Just keep asking them, and we'll address all of them, the relevant ones. I think this is an interesting one, Shriram, and a lot of people approach me and say, okay, what is a good school for product management? What is a good school for consulting?
Now we have a question. What is a good school for MBA strategy? And so I think in general, in the US programs, the top programs that we are talking about do not offer a specialization. You can pick a track. For instance, at MIT, you can pick from out of 4 or 5 tracks like entrepreneurship and innovation, enterprise management, and so on and so forth. So they're starting to offer some informal ways for you to proceed in a certain direction or focus. But the MBA is just the MBA. So it's not an MBA in marketing or an MBA in finance or an MBA in strategy. So I think to your point, Shimri, the number of electives are just so high that as long as the school has a flexible curriculum, especially in the second year and in many cases even the first year, you can craft your own pathway and focus on whatever you want. And so I would look for a school, especially when it comes to the US, and maybe you can talk about Europe. In the US, you might want to go for a school that offers more of a flexible curriculum. And we hear that a lot about schools like MIT Sloan, Chicago Booth, where you can craft and look at what you want to do and then craft your own pathway through that. But if you're looking for them to decide that for you, then you want to go with a school where in the first year, especially it's all mandatory courses. And then even in the second one, you have very clearly defined pathways, like I said, the entrepreneurship innovation pathway or product management pathway, where they do the curation for you. So that's how I would go for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And a lot of people ask me, so what's the specialization of this school? And I say, there's no specialization. You build your own path. And I think I agree. I think all the schools I know of have electives, and you can choose which specialization you're taking. And like I said, I took in entrepreneurship. I don't even know if there is a specialization like that, just because I built a lot of my electives based on entrepreneurship courses.
Yeah. And I built a lot of them both around entrepreneurship and also the creative industry, which I think is really interesting, right? Like there's very few people who try to focus on the entertainment side of it. And I was just looking at okay, in the MBA program, I have this, in the engineering programs, I have this, and in the law program, I can probably take this. And so you have the option to craft your own pathway. And that's all I have to add on that.
Okay. So we spoke a bit about the core courses and the electives. Shriram, what happens outside of class?
I think most of the MBA experience is outside the class, if I have to be honest.
Agree.
Especially in the States,
I agree.
Right? And the clubs are a huge component, both the professional clubs like the Media Entertainment Club, like I said, the Management Consulting Club, Tech Club, Product Club, all of these professional clubs where they're constantly organizing company visits, they're organizing conferences, they're organizing guest lectures by industry experts, they're organizing preparation for you to get help on recruiting. So the Management Consulting Club did this like day-long set of like case study interview prep by students and also by alumni. And most of them do this interview prep, resume prep, all those kinds of things. And then of course you have the social clubs, like you have the various cultural clubs like the Asian Business Club or the South Asian Club or the Latin American Club, Middle Eastern Club. And then you also have other hobby-specific sports clubs or dance clubs and music clubs and things like that. And that
don't forget the Cheese and Wine Club. That's a very important club.
The whiskey tasting club too. Yeah, that one's
that's in Europe. That's one of the important clubs.
Wine tasting club. That's right. And I think that is where you build most of your connections, most of what makes this a rich experience, a memorable one, and building friendships for life. And so for a lot of people who are trying to say, oh, like, I'm going to kind of come in and then figure out what I need to do. I'm like, you will not have the time. Like when you come in, there's like so many things that you're doing both in and outside the classroom. There is no time. You have to decide everything before you go in. So clubs make up a huge component. I'm guessing for both schools, right? Like I'm guessing Europe is no different.
Yeah. So like my experience and the way you're talking about, it could have been London Business School. I think there's 200 clubs at London Business School. Like you said, fun clubs, professional clubs, regional clubs, everything. My best experience was when our technology club actually did a collaboration with London School of Arts, and lots of masters in design and various people which are very not business minded came to the club, and we tried to sit together and think of joint ventures. And they were the creative people and we were the business minded people, and amazing. So yeah, that's my experience, that most of the magic and most of the action and most of your time is actually outside of class, networking and just growing your knowledge on more and more things. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So this is a touchy subject as well, I think, for the US. So I don't know the numbers, but I'm assuming between a fourth to a third of people will come at least with a spouse, if not with a family. So I can tell you in Europe and in the UK, in most places, and again, visas change, so I don't go into this too much, your spouse can work. So throughout your MBA, your spouse can work. Another thing is, because the schools are so small, there's no restrictions on your spouse. And my girlfriend that came with me to the MBA experience, she's now my wife, actually got on day one a card that allows her to go into the gym, to the pool, to the library, to come into the London Business School facility. On Thursdays, there used to be like a big event. Basically, you drink lots of beers every Thursday, and partners are welcome to that. There's a partners club at London Business School where partners do all different activities together. They're actually welcome to come to some classes during the year. So I think the European schools, because they're so small, they do have a great environment for partners, and the biggest advantage here is partners can work. To you, Shriram.
So partners can work, definitely. There's no denying that. Free beer, though, is available in the US too. For spouse.
Okay. So, not in the same quantities. I'm telling you now.
We offer whiskey too. It's not just beer.
Okay.
So I think, yes, I agree. If you already have, or if your spouse already has a working visa, then of course you can work in the States. But if you're coming on a student visa, then on your wife's corresponding visa that she gets, or your spouse or significant other, they will not have the ability to work.
That is correct.
That is a big concern for most people who are coming with family or with a partner who might want to be working at that time. Having said that, in terms of the social and the cultural experience, there are clubs for significant others, as they're called, and they are integrated very well into the cultural ecosystem. They socialize with everybody, and they pretty much take advantage of a lot of the campus resources as well. So that part I think is similar for both, but definitely the working situation is a big advantage if that's important to you for Europe.
I have to admit, Shriram, that at ARINGO we speak to a lot of director of admissions from all schools, and I have like my set of questions that I ask, all the head of the admissions, and I think I've interviewed all top 10 MBAs in the US head of admissions. Mm-hmm. And my last question is, is your school family friendly?
Uh-huh.
And all the top 10 said exactly the same thing. They said, oh, our school, we have a family club, we have a partners club, a spouses club, they can come. So I think this is a big topic that they've all taken into account in the last few years, and made it a huge topic. They made it more family friendly. I know at Stanford there's actually a family club with some kind of style thing. Yeah, so I know they're all paying attention to this. And again, in Europe, much easier. That schools are smaller. So that's it. Those are the talking points. Now we're actually going to dig into your question. So if you haven't written your question and you have one, please write it. We'll run through them very quickly. There's another marketing slide. Wow, I didn't even know this. So again, we're from ARINGO. ARINGO help candidates get into top schools. I'm not going to go into everything, but there's a lot of work to do when you apply to top MBAs, and we're there to help. That's it. That was my marketing slide. You actually have my email. If you want us to talk further, you can just send me an email or check us out on aringo.com. That's it. That was the presentation. And now, Shriram, we can actually go through some of the comments and the questions. Maybe chronological, if that makes sense.
I'm going to start about, Sandeep was asking about, can you talk about fee and scholarships as well? So I'll just quickly touch upon this. Scholarships, like I already mentioned previously before, each school will offer a set of scholarships. You could either get it at the time of admission, which is difficult to control. That's more a function of how much they want you and how many other offers you're competing with. But we do at ARINGO help you negotiate that if you have multiple offers and whenever you have multiple offers.
Correct. Shriram, let me sorry, Chuck, we just did our statistics from last year, so I have to, I'm sorry. 56% of the people we worked with last year got a scholarship.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if to embarrass the school, but Cornell gave the lowest one for one candidate, okay? I think it was $12,000, which is nice, but probably not enough. Mm-hmm. Okay, but most of the scholarships will be tens of thousands of dollars. I'll just say about Europe, there aren't many full scholarships in Europe. And this is something we do see in the US. So last year, ARINGO had 12 candidates that got a full ride, a full scholarship, and none of them came from Europe. I just want to be honest. I think the highest scholarship last year in Europe was 50% of tuition. A year before that, we did get a full scholarship, or one of the candidates in Cambridge. In the US, we do see full scholarships as well, but as well as partial scholarships. I have to admit, I'm with Shriram on this. I know it's a huge amount of unbelievable money. You get it back. And if it takes 3 years or 4 years, it's all good.
Yeah. So I'm definitely going to emphasize very dramatically that do not be so hung up on scholarships. Getting a loan is super easy. The rates are very low. And then on top of it, you're going to recover that and more. So don't worry about it.
Okay. Let's move on.
I'm looking for something to be a good storyteller. Can you please suggest something? I'm literally stuck with writing my essays. Well, that's
that's what we do, guys. So if you need help, just contact us and we'll take it from there.
And I'd like to emphasize that, right? Like, and ARINGO does a fabulous job with this, and that's why I enjoy working with these guys too. That storytelling is pretty much, like, in my opinion, the biggest determining factor. How do you stand out? Almost everyone's resumes nowadays look similar for all the applicants, and it's really about where you're coming from, your personal story, drawing upon your cultural, social, individual influences, and how that has determined the decisions that you've made in your life. And bringing that forward, I think, is the bulk of the job. And the rest, everything in terms of just putting those words together, is the easy part. So that's what we specialize in. And you can talk to us about that. Then we have Rahul already addressed your question about, is it too late to start Gmat prep for 2021? It's never too late. But of course, if you're a good test taker, it's much easier. If not, you'll probably have to spend more time.
Correct.
Which are the European schools that give an excellent leadership experience? Shimri, this might be for you.
Yeah, so my take on it is, most European schools are pretty much similar. They give the same experiences. I also look a lot of times at where the alumni go to post MBA, and I just see the same numbers. Okay, so it doesn't really matter if a third go to consulting, a third go to tech, and the other third goes to industry, with finance is probably big there as well, or if it's 23% to tech and 20, it's the same kind of four routes today. Again, consulting, finance, tech, and the rest, which is industry. And all MBAs give leadership experience. Okay, yeah. So I can't think of one which is more leadership oriented than the others.
Not the other. Yeah, I agree. And there's a question here about, is there a difference with how US or European schools take your undergrad school into consideration? Like, would a 3.5 GPA low ranked school be measured the same as 3.5 GPA in a top 20 global?
I don't think there's a difference. I have to admit that GPA is not the most important factor in your MBA.
Yeah.
And just today I spoke to someone with a 2.5, and she asked me one question: how can I do something that will hide the GPA? And I said, get 10 more points on the Gmat.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have a low GPA and you have a high Gmat, that offsets it. Yeah. If you have a low GPA and you have a special story, that offsets it. Okay, so don't worry too much about the GPA. If it's very low, yes, you might want to explain it in the optional essay why it was so low. But if it was just mediocre or average, just move on and play on your strengths, not on a weakness.
Absolutely. And then would both of you share how to prepare efficiently? Guys, TOEFL, GMAT preparation, I think we have standard resources. You just have to go through those. I know
Correct.
The official guide is good enough. If not, you could just have a consultant and we can recommend some, or you can do that too. But yeah, that's the question on that. How do you foresee Advait's question, European and US job market changing for international students post-COVID? We addressed this again previously, so we're not going to go over that again.
I'm staying optimistic. I really think, and again, this is speaking to head of different admission committees who speak to very senior people at the big recruiters. And they're saying there's no dip right now. They're still recruiting top MBAs, but they think in 2 years, there'll be a much higher recruitment rate, and the competition for them will be tougher because it's going to be the same amount of MBAs and they're going to need to recruit top people. So we actually think there'll be a rise in this.
Much better, absolutely. Kshitij is asking, can I get into US MBA program straight after completing my undergrad degree? So not most, but like definitely some of the top programs offer the 2+2 program for for seniors in undergrad. So you can in your final year apply for the 2+2 program, which basically means that you apply at that point. If you're admitted, you get to work for 2 years, and then you can get into the program without another round of selection. You can, in principle, apply at any point of time. I have had classmates at MIT who had 0 years of work experience. I've had classmates who had 12 years of work experience. So in principle, you can apply. So if the 2+2 program is specifically catered for those completing the undergrad degree in your final year, but even otherwise you can, and you're just taking a chance on being one of that small set of people who get in straight.
Let me elaborate on that. I think times are changing a bit, and I think a lot of the programs are saying they want a minimum of 2 or 3. So it depends which program. Again, we're trying to address this in a wide way. A lot of the programs are saying that they want a minimum of 2, and some programs even say 3 years. Again, Shriram's absolutely right. I've seen exceptions.
Yeah.
Okay, I've seen exceptions to every requirement in the MBAs. But if you're not exceptional, you won't be in that exception. Okay, so if you don't have 2 or 3 years minimum, it will be very hard to go to a program like that if you didn't do something very, very unique. Mm-hmm. There's 2 trends that I would like to just mention, and I think I saw a question about that, so I hope I'm answering that as well. And one trend is master in management programs. We're seeing more and more, especially in Europe. Now they're starting to get to the US as well, which are very similar to MBA programs, but designated for people with up to 2 years of experience. So it's for young candidates between 0 and 2 years of experience. Similar curricular in some ways, a business curricular. Obviously, salaries are a bit lower, and because you're more junior people. But that's one trend. Second trend is what Shriram was mentioning, which is these deferred programs. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, only Harvard was offering this.
Yes.
And today we're seeing it at MIT, Stanford, Booth, Wharton, Columbia. I must have forgotten a few, which are offering this deferred. Yeah, with offering this deferred option, which is on your last year of university, you can already apply for an MBA, get in, and then go and work a couple of years with this place guaranteed for you. I'll just also say, this is for very, very good candidates. Now, if you haven't worked because you don't have any work experience, then very good would mean an exceptional GPA, because that's what they can look at, and would mean a high Gmat, maybe some very good internships, maybe some good extracurricular activities, because again, you don't have any professional achievements, so they're going to look at all of that.
Yep, absolutely. There's a series of questions here that we've already answered in some form or format, so in the interest of time, I'll move on from those. And then Pallab is asking, what is a good source to learn more about the culture of different schools?
Such a good question.
Yes, yeah, it's a great question. And usually if you write to the club heads for the kind of club that you want to take on in school, you'll find the website online and write to the president. Sometimes they're willing to just jump on a quick 10 to 15 minute call to talk about it. You can reach out through your own personal and professional networks, of course. And then you can also reach out on LinkedIn. And I used to get a lot of invites, and I still do actually, to talk about the SLOAN MBA program. And what you want to make, the ask you want to make is, I just want to spend 10 to 15 minutes over a quick call, very specifically to learn about X. That you'll have higher chances of responses based on that, rather than just saying, I just want to learn more about the school. Can I talk to you? Which feels like, oh my God, I don't know how much time he or she wants to spend. That's my take on that.
I agree. And I think try and find people from the schools that have some kind of commonality with you. Okay, it can be, yes, they lived in your hometown, but it can be that they worked in the same company, or they, studied in the same university, or have the same interests as you. And they will be interested to talk to you, so then you can learn from them more about the school culture.
And then there are some questions again about the size of the networks of European and US schools, and we've gone over that already.
Yeah. London Business School have more than 20,000 graduates, so I think that's a nice network.
Vishesh is asking, can you please share how has the experience been working with people this year amidst the uncertainty due to the deferrals offered last year? Shimri, thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I'm seeing an uplift in the number of applications, and you're absolutely right. They might be in some schools, maybe in most of them, less seats, right? Because if someone last year got into Harvard, and Harvard in June said, if you want to defer your studies due to the COVID, you can. And 200 people said, I'll defer my studies. That means there's less seats in Harvard this year. But first of all, they deferred across 2 years.
Yeah.
So I can't remember if Harvard has 750 or 800 seats a year. So yes, there's 100 less. Yeah. Fine. So it is a bit harder statistically to get into Harvard this year. But again, it's always hard to get into Harvard. And if you're a good candidate, you should just go for it. Because I think that next year will be just as hard.
Just as hard.
One, a lot of deferrals will defer for 2 years. Second, a lot of people will think it's harder this year and will actually go for next year. Third, after a big financial crisis, there's an uplift in MBA applications. So I don't think next year is going to be easier. I think if you're ready this year, you have the Gmat, you have the right professional experience, it might be a bit harder. You were planning to go for 4 schools, go for 5. What can we say? Just go for it. I've only seen our round 1 applications, and right now we've received, most of the schools have already sent the interviews, and we're seeing very similar results to previous years.
Yeah.
So just had the MIT interviews. We have 14 MIT interviews from Saturday, so that was amazing. All good. Okay, so we're seeing the same statistics so far. Again, I don't know what will happen by then.
I'll just add one small thing to that. There's 2 more factors to consider. One is that there are also a set of people who are not applying already because they feel like part of the experience is going to be online. So that I think is offsetting a little bit the number of people applying. And secondly, I would also think of it in terms of how your profile is going to change between this year and next. Are you going to get a promotion? Is your leadership experience going to be dramatically more different? I was just talking to a few clients of mine who had a similar concern to what Vishesh is asking. And I said, okay, are you going to get a promotion by next year? Is your company doing such amazing work that your work profile and the number of stories you can talk about are going to dramatically increase? And they're like, no. And so if it's the same, then you're just spending 1 more year pretty much doing the same thing. That does not improve your chances. It just adds 1 more year on your resume without that much more of an impressive change in work profile. So I would consider that as well. And so my recommendation to them flat out was to apply this year. And they are. So
I agree.
Okay. How are the tech MBA programs? Do they have the same value as a regular MBA? NYU Stern Tech and Cornell Tech.
Okay. I love these programs, by the way. So we have candidates for them every year. So just whoever doesn't know them, there's two programs in New York City. One's at NYU and one's in Cornell Tech, but it's on Roosevelt Island on the Hudson, so it's not in Ithaca. Amazing one-year programs for people with tech backgrounds. Now, they have a few differentiators, which are both advantages and disadvantages. So the program's 1 year, we discussed before. You can see it as an advantage. It costs less. And a disadvantage, you study much quicker and there's no internship. Second factor, everybody that comes to the program has a tech background. That's a requirement. Although last year I had the lawyer. Most people have a tech background. And that's an advantage because I may want to work in a tech environment. And that's a disadvantage. There's no Polish lawyers or Bulgarian people, oil and gas employees. So there's advantages and disadvantages. There's also advantage in where your career can go to. I looked at the Cornell Tech statistics, and I think I saw 50 or 60% went to product management, obviously in tech companies. By the way, a huge amount, I don't know, just invent the number, I don't remember it, just did entrepreneurship, and they're staying on the Cornell Tech campus to develop their own venture. So that's amazing. But if you want to do a career shift to consulting or go and work somewhere in the industry, this is not the MBA for you.
Great.
How are we doing with the questions?
So I think I'm just going through a few more. Guys, if there's any, okay, how much value the LOR holds in getting admission? There is just one or two more questions, so we can go through those.
Okay.
So the letter of recommendation, in my opinion, is a very important factor in the admission, because I think apart from you saying you're amazing, you're a great leader, you're a brilliant analytical mind, it actually has someone else vouching for you. And someone else, which is why they ask most likely for a direct supervisor, someone who could have fired you and who has no stake in lying on your behalf, at least on paper. So I think a good LOR is key to getting that admit or to getting standing apart from other candidates. That's my simple short response.
I can't agree more. And when we think about admissions, they have to compare a lawyer to an accountant to a programmer. And what they can do is they can look at what your manager is saying, and he manages a few people, and at least they can't compare the lawyer to the accountant, but at least the manager can compare you to your peers. So if he's saying, listen, this is the best employee I've ever had, and he manages 100 people, that goes far, and that's important. And he can give examples of why you're the best employee ever. And he might say, you know, you're great, but it might not be so strong. So I think this does help to give like a holistic picture on you.
Absolutely. We're going to take two more questions before we wrap up. So okay. One question is it a risk if I merely apply to 4 to 5 schools in this round? We briefly touched upon it. I think you should, during this time, apply to as many as you possibly can. If you start early enough, you have support from a good consultant who helps craft your story well. We have, and I've helped people with up to 9 to 10 schools sometimes in one round. 4 to 5 is ideal, but I think if you have the ability to do more, you should, is my take on it, Shimri.
Yeah, nothing to mention.
And then, could you please share your opinion on how to look at programs that are beginning this year? Kellogg MBAI, on one hand, coming from a school like Kellogg, but the only source of info being the website.
Of course. So again, this is typical. Okay, so there's, you know, schools are looking to innovate, and historically there was, I think, one school that was offering, which is MIT, which was offering an engineering and MBA joint program called LGO, and I'm seeing a trend here. Berkeley just offered something like that. Harvard offered 2-3 years ago a joint program with computer science masters, and now Kellogg are offering it. You're right, it's new. So we know nothing about it. It looks amazing. If you're looking for a joint engineering and MBA program, I would go for all the ones I mentioned, and Kellogg is one of them. So we don't have any information, but you know, it looks amazing.
It's a classic high risk, high return, low risk, low return dilemma. So you're taking
it looks good. It looks good.
Getting on a program, I know, but then it's easier to get in, hopefully, because I'm sure there are other people with the same concerns.
Who knows?
Last and final question is Manoj asking any tips how to prep the recommender. And this is obviously going to be a much longer thing when you work with a consultant, but I'll just touch upon this very briefly. You want to pick somebody who's very willing and enthusiastic to give you the recommendation. They do have to write in superlatives about you.
Let me add on that, Shriram. A recommendation can be up to 2,000 words.
Yeah.
And a recommendation for London Business School is different than a recommendation for INSEAD.
Yeah.
So they'll have to write between 1,000 and 2,000 words times the number of schools you're applying to.
Yeah.
I'm not sure my sister would do that in a good way. Okay. This is a lot of work and he has to be up for it. So how to prep the recommender? First of all, decide, who you're choosing in advance. You think who would be the best person to do this? Is it your boss? Is it your boss's boss? Is it your previous employer? And then approach them, explain to them the whole process and hope they're on board.
Yep. And then I think there's one final thing I'd like to add on that is there are people who would be willing and they have the experience and expertise in writing MBA recommendations, and that's great. Right. But if your recommender does not have that expertise, you might want to actually talk to them and explain all of what Shimri just said. You have to do this differently for each school. It's not a simple standard thing. There are specific questions that each school asks, and you have to respond to those with a certain word limit in most cases. And so they have to be willing to do all of that. And you just have to use everything in your convincing book to be able to get them on board. I'd say that.
I agree. So I think we'll wrap it up. There were some amazing questions. I don't think we actually hit all the questions, so I apologize for that. Just check us out on aringo.com. You have my email, which is shimriw@aringo.com. Feel free to shoot out a note with your CV so we know who you are. And I think I wish everybody good luck in their MBA aspirations and lots of success. Final words, Shriram. And European schools are better. I forgot to say.
US MBAs are the best. Europeans are better. US are the best. So.
Okay, guys. So thanks a lot. Bye for now.
Yep. Bye, everyone.